Hello, I'm back. Penny here with a story time and discussion about my Rolex BLNR and how I got it at retail. Well, there's two stories in one here. So settle in, grab a drink, grab some popcorn. This is how I got this watch at retail, not knowing a damn thing about watch collecting at that time. Okay, so you got to go back to 2018. That's when this story began. I was getting into watches. I had a few pieces. I had a lot of affordable watches at that point, and it was like crack. I was just buying them up. Boom, 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 boom. I also bought the Speedmaster at around that time. Maybe it was the year before. And I had a bunch of like affordable watches. I had a watch box full of like an Orient, Mako, a couple Orients actually. I had an orange one that was based on the Planet Ocean. Anyway, I had a box of affordable watches, and I had the Speedmaster. Eventually, I got the Speedmaster. And I was telling myself, I'm not a Rolex person. If anything, I'm an Omega person. So I wasn't interested in Rolex when I got my first luxury piece, because even though there wasn't as much hype about Rolex now as there is now, it loomed very large in the conversation. The brand, of course it does. And all the forums and Instagram posts and stuff that I was coming across was just Rolex, 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 Rolex. So that was off-putting to me. And I wanted something else. So I decided I was going to go for the Speedy. Okay, so keep in mind that, again, even though I was collecting watches, I didn't have any relationships with anybody. And I didn't know you needed relationships to buy a watch. That was just like, what? However, because we were getting into it and my wife was getting into it at the same time, we used to spend a day, like a Saturday or so, driving around in our region, visiting watch resellers like jewelers and ADs, and just watch stores. Like if there was a new store that popped up on the map that I didn't know about, we would go and have lunch and go visit and talk to people. So we've been making our rounds visiting stores, and by seeing things in person, I started to come across Rolexes. We came across the Yachtmasters, like pre-owned. I even came across the GMT. There was the gold. It was like a two-tone GMT that had the green hand before they discontinued that one. And I came across that and loved it, and was like, oh, wow, what is this? And I loved the numbers around the bezel, the 24-hour bezel. So I loved that GMT two-tone. However, I wasn't ready for gold at that moment, and I felt like it was a little bit too flashy. And I thought, oh, man, this just screams like, rob me or something. I just wasn't ready to go gold. I am now, a little bit. Anyway, so I was visiting Rolex ADs. There's several in the region, and I would drive around and we'd visit and we'd talk. Went to the guy that I now call Rolex AD number one. And, I would visit him fairly often whenever I was bored, go for a drive, go visit and talk and chat, introduce myself. And at that moment in 2018, guys, there were watches in the case. I mean, I saw the Submariner, the previous one, with the thicker lugs. It was too boxy for me at that time. I didn't like it. I saw the Explorer 2, 42 millimeter, which they tried to sell me, but I thought it was too big on my wrist. Wearing the AP still. And, I saw a lot of stuff in the store. One of the things that I saw in the store that the sales guy had was the GMT all black. So it was the GMT all black, GMT Master all black, black with the green GMT hand. And so that, guys, was the first Rolex I fell for. He was wearing that watch. I just loved it. I liked that it looked a little bit different than the Submariner. It didn't fit my wrist as boxy a way as the Submariner did. I think because this informational bezel has just it takes up more space because the numbers are there. So it crowds it in a little bit, and it just makes the watch fit smaller. And then too, definitely the lugs on this version Maybe the lugs on the previous version were just seemed a little bit smaller. It just seemed to fit better. So sales guy has this all black GMT on. I've been chatting it up with them, quite a bit here and there. And I say, that's it. That's the watch I want. We'd been talking and stuff, so he knew who I was. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah, this your watch, your GMT watch, the all black, is the watch for me. And they laughed. They were like, okay, this is 2018. And I was like, no, seriously, I want that watch. I came back a couple more times. Finally, they wrote down my name on like a Post-it, my number and everything. And they started asking me personal questions like, who are you again? Where do you live? What do you do for a living? Like that kind of stuff. And when they started asking those kind of questions, I was like, okay, they're interested now. I mean, they're considering it. So, they did put my name down, and, I didn't think anything else about it. I would visit them occasionally, but I didn't think about the watch, like I would get that watch. So we had been buying a lot of affordables. We even bought a vintage Rolex 1500, a Rolex date from a jeweler, but it ended up being really broken, and they couldn't fix it. Like the movement was shoddy about that watch. So consider this is like the fall of 2018. I bought a vintagey Rolex. That was the first one that we got technically, and a bunch of affordables. And then I even bought a Omega Seamaster that now my wife has. And this is like October or something of 2018. So I bought all this stuff, and then I get the call from this Rolex AD who says, okay, I have a GMT in. Do you want it? And I was like, ooh, I didn't really think that they were going to call me for that. And, he told me the price, and I knew the ballpark, but the price was still, at that moment, I had sticker shock. It was like, I don't know, it was 8,500 or something like that. It was around 8,000, 8 or 9,000. And I was like, whoa, just now being faced with the reality of buying it in that moment, your girl wasn't ready. And I had just bought all this kind of junky stuff in a way, like this vintagey Rolex, which was not for me. It didn't even work. So I was sitting on that. I just bought the Seamaster, had a watch box full of affordables. And I told them, you know what? I've been buying too many watches. I'm going to pass. I was like, I'm going to pass. Thank you for your phone call. I'm good. So guys, you would think that would be the nail in the coffin. Like, I turned down a watch that I asked for, repeatedly asked for, and said I wanted. But this was young Penny. I wasn't that young. This was like young in the watch game, right? In watch collecting. And I didn't really know one does not do that. When one gets a call for a watch you want, you better figure out how to buy it. This is new life lessons, new collecting lessons. Look at my video, 6 things I've learned about watch collecting. I've come a long way. And so in this phase is when I started learning some hard lessons. So I passed on that. We ended up refunding, getting a refund on that vintagey Rolex. Got my money back, was sad because I was like, that was going to be my first Rolex. And it was so cute, this Rolex date. Time goes on, and we're into 2019, which, if you remember, at Basel of 2019, Rolex just discontinued a bunch of stuff. They discontinued the all black GMT. They discontinued the GMT line and introduced the BLNR on the Jubilee. They had it. They discontinued the previous one, slimmed down the lugs. They got rid of the all black. They got rid of that two-tone one, the yellow gold two-tone one. And then I'm like, dang, why did they do that? I was still in the back of my mind wanting to go back and get that all black GMT. And then I was like, now I'm never going to get it. The prices on the all black GMT on the gray market skyrocketed in that moment. They went up to like 15,000, and I was barely ready to even spend 8,000. I didn't even want to do that. So they skyrocketed. And I was sad. I was like, dude, this sucks. So, but by that point, I really did want the Rolex, and I really was psychologically ready to spend the money. So making my rounds and stuff, I, outside of Boston, go to this jeweler, and they have the Polar Explorer. They had a whole bunch of pre-owned Rolexes. They had the Polar Explorer. They even had the all black guys. Well, actually, this was right before the discontinuations because they had the Polar Explorer and they had the all black. So I bought the Polar Explorer because the sales lady was like, well, you're going to have a chance to get the GMT at any moment. It's a new watch. So, it's not going anywhere. So I had to backtrack of the story a little bit. I did buy the Polar Explorer, which ended up being my first Rolex that we kept. But I still wanted that all black. So, okay, they could discontinue it. Going forward, I'm like, man, I'm never going to get a GMT. So I go back to the AD after Basel of 2019, and he laughs at me. I come through the door, and he just starts laughing. And I'm like, oh, man. And I just eat crow. I'm like, you know what? You guys were right. I should have bought that watch. Now it's discontinued. And I said, you're never going to sell me a watch, are you? And he was like, you burned your bridge, girl. But I could tell that he was sort of amused by me. Like, who is this person? She won't leave me alone and she won't buy a watch. What is she doing? I could tell that even though I thought I burned that relationship, he was still somewhat amused. This is the owner of the place. And I just kept talking to him. I was like, you know what? If you ever decide to sell me a watch, please consider me for the new, the Batman, the Batgirl, whatever, the new GMT. Consider me for it. So this was like spring of 2019. And he laughed again. It was like, yeah. But I still visited. I didn't really think that he would get it for me, but I liked watches at that point. I was in deep, and I would go there, talk about Rolex, see what they had, look at Datejust, show them my Polar Explorer, get things resized, whatever. I was going there regularly at that point and checking in with them and checking in with all the watch shops just because I liked to talk and I liked looking and window shopping. And it was like a social outing. Like I said, my wife and I would go have lunch and go window shop for watches. So I kept the relationship going. Eventually in 2019, he says, okay, you know what? I'm going to give you another shot. When I get one of these, when I get one of those that you want, the BLNR, I'll sell it to you. I'll call you. I'll let you know. And I was like, okay, I'll be ready. This time I'm not going to pass on the money. I'm not going to pass on it. And he really prefers cash. So I knew that, like, you're not going to put it on a card and get points and all this stuff. You need to have your cash ready to go, get a cashier's check, etc. So I knew that. So around that time, in preparing for the BLNR, thinking that, he's going to call me for it, I sold the Milgauss because I had also acquired a Milgauss during that time, pre-owned. And I just said, you know what, if I'm going to get the BLNR, that's what I really wanted, I could let go of the Milgauss. So that story. I bought and sold a Milgauss, sold that one in that moment, sold my Speedmaster, and was like, this is going to be it. I'm going to have the Polar Explorer, and I'm going to have the BLNR and some other affordables, and that will be it for watch collecting. He does eventually call, and I was ready, and I went and got this watch, and, that's how it happened. I guess my lessons from that are that you have to be patient when it comes to Rolex, which I am not a patient person, and if you're not ready to buy a watch, I think that if you're not financially ready, you have to be completely honest and only tell the ADs that you're interested when you have the money. That was the other thing that I learned. When you have it and you're willing to spend it. And at the time, I was not willing to spend it really, even though I had it. And that's why I downsized, because I was still like not cool with having that much in watches. Now I've already surpassed that. I'm over that. But at the time, I learned you need to be patient. Don't express interest in a watch until you have the cash on hand. That was the other lesson I learned. And the other thing I learned, which I didn't say in my video about my watch collecting, lessons, is that ADs are people too. And you can make mistakes and still not burn those bridges necessarily. I mean, they're going to hopefully see the human side of you if you fumble a little bit and, whatever. It might irritate them for sure that you're not going to get a watch that they call you for. But I think you can cultivate it as a real relationship to some extent where they could understand that, like, you know what, I wanted it, but I wasn't ready. They're going to understand that. And ultimately, if they like you or find you, authentic, they're going to probably work with you. So that's my Rolex BLNR story. I was really wanted the all black GMT. I think that desire has quelled. I don't want one anymore because I do like this watch. But that was almost my first Rolex. The other story, here's a quick other story about this watch. I was getting my car serviced in Massachusetts. You have to have these smog stickers, like every state. You get your car like smog checked and stuff, and they put the sticker on your car. I'm in line to get my car serviced, and I'm sitting in the car. I have I'll put the watch on because I'm going to reenact what happened in this case. We always say, do people notice your watches? I was sitting in the car and I had my arm out the window, like hanging on the window while I'm waiting for my turn to come up. And at that time, I wasn't even wearing this on the Jubilee. I was wearing this on like a gray NATO strap. And I had this watch on gray NATO. And so I'm sitting in the car and the guy comes up, this young guy comes up to me. And I'm thinking, and he's smiling and like, all cheery and stuff. And I know before he even says anything that he's going to talk about my car because I drive an enthusiast car. This is a car that young guys, it's not a Porsche. It's much more modest than that, but it's a car that young guys like, and they like to mod it and do all this cool stuff to it. And my insurance is hell of expensive because these young guys who buy this car crash it a lot, apparently. And so this car, it is what it is. I love it. I have customized it myself, gotten some cool aesthetic mods on the car, but I don't do anything under the hood, really. And so this guy is coming up to me and he's smiling and nodding and stuff. And I just know he's going to say, start talking to me about this car. Because this happens at gas stations all the time. Young dudes give me the thumbs up and they want to come up to me. They're like 19, 20-year-olds and talk to me about this car. So I'm thinking, I have my hand out the window and I'm thinking, okay, here he comes talking about the car. I'm ready for that. But what he says instead is, I like your Rolex GMT Master 2 BLNR. Like very specifically says the whole damn model reference or name of the watch. And I was taken aback because I was again thinking he was going to talk to me about the car. And he didn't. He'd mentioned the watch. And then I was like self-conscious, like, oh, no one ever notices my watches. Rarely do people notice our watches. And I felt a little uncomfortable. I was like, wow, he's come, I don't know. In the moment, I almost probably frowned or something. And I was like, oh, thanks. And then I, got out the car, gave him the key and, went to go wait into the waiting area for the car to get serviced. And so while I was waiting, I was thinking, wait a minute, Penny, that's a whack reaction. This guy is probably like, he was young. He was maybe barely 21, if that. And I'm thinking, you know what? He's a young guy who clearly knows what this watch is. Don't feel weird. Don't be weird. Don't rebuff that. It's a chance to talk to a young collector or a young enthusiast at least. So when he brought my car back out, brought it out of the service bay and we swapped and I paid and gave him he gave me the key back. I slowed down and I said, he was wearing a G-Shock. And I said, hey, nice G-Shock. That's a really cool piece to have. And we started talking. I initiated the conversation because I didn't want to be that like squirrely, weird person who's like, are you going to rob me for my watch? Like, come on now. I didn't want to have that attitude. And I didn't want to be off-putting about it. And he said, yeah, someday I want to get, of course, he wants to get GMT Master 2 BLNR because he knew exactly what it was, even though I had it on the NATO strap. It wasn't even that Rolexy in that moment. And he's talking to me and he says his grandfather left him an old Seamaster. And that is how he got interested in watches. And he wants to buy this, Rolex someday. And so it was cool to just hang out with him outside and talk about the watch and watch collecting. And I talked to him about young kids not really being into watches. And I was like, it's really cool that you are. You're not wearing an Apple Watch. You're wearing a nice watch. You're working on cars. You're wearing a nice watch for that in the G-Shock. So I really wanted to like pump him up a little bit and say, hey, keep doing what you're doing and you'll get this watch someday. You might want something else by that point, but if this is what you want, go for it. So it was a nice interaction that I saved. I saved it. It was like a fumble in the moment when he, and we're so different. Like I'm this middle-aged Black woman with the kid's car. And this young white dude is like, chatting with me. And we talked for like 20 minutes maybe outside the thing. And it was just a really cool experience. Like you would think us two people would not have that much to say to each other as strangers but the watch, not the car, the watch this time around was the thing that like brought us together to have this conversation about his grandfather, about the Seamaster. And I didn't even know which Seamaster it was. There's a lot of vintage Seamasters, but it was a nice surprise, and I felt like I saved the interaction because it was not going to go anywhere when he, acknowledged the watch, and I just like scurried away, was like, shied away from the interaction initially. And once I had time to reflect that, like, no, don't be don't be afraid of an interaction around your watch in public. Go for it. I had a second chance when he brought the car back to me. And so I haven't seen that kid again. I go there to get my car serviced, all the time and get stickers and fill up and stuff. I haven't seen him since then, but hopefully he's still into watches. And that was one of the few moments where I've interacted with a stranger in public about a watch. And it was this watch, the BLNR. So that's my BLNR story of how I got it at retail. I made some mistakes and recovered from them. I think I'm a good customer for the AD. I'm not a high-end customer by any means, and I don't have access to any watch I want, but I think I can still get some things, and this was the first. This was actually the first watch I bought from him. I did end up buying Oyster Perpetual for my wife from him as well, and since then we've bought a few watches, but this was actually the first purchase, and it's how I got it at retail, which does happen, guys. So don't give up if that's your goal, is to get a certain watch from an AD. You can definitely do that through conventional channels without having to pay, a premium for it. All right. Peace.